I've been designing YouTube intros for other creators and business owners for almost 6 years, but today I'm going to be designing an intro for the pickiest, most annoying client I've ever had. Me. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Jahnae, also known as Shayna, and I'm a self-taught graphic designer based in Toronto. And in today's video, I'm going to be designing a YouTube intro for myself. For those of you who don't know, I've offered many different graphic design services over the years, but YouTube Essentials have always been my best seller. I've designed hundreds, maybe even thousands of intros to date, and maybe even for some of your favorite content creators, but I've never designed an intro for myself, so this will be interesting. I spent the last 6 years perfecting an onboarding system that makes the whole creation process as smooth as possible for both me and my clients. Since I am the client today, you'll also be getting a small glimpse of my onboarding process as well. I did already touch on my onboarding process in my first YouTube video, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Let's get started. My design process is broken down into 5 stages. Stage 1, inquiry and service selection. Stage 2, design questionnaire and conceptualization. Stage 3, design development. Stage 4, revisions and final touches. And stage 5, delivery. So stage 1, inquiry and service selection. Sometimes a client needs a little bit of direction as to what service best suits their needs, so I always encourage them to reach out if they have any questions or concerns. Once they do decide on a service, they can go ahead and place an order with me on my website. In my case, it would be a custom YouTube intro. Now we move on to stage 2, design questionnaire and conceptualization. Once the order has been placed, an automated email is sent to the client with the 2 onboarding steps required to begin. Number 1 is a signature of the terms of service. This is really important to have to protect both me and the client, but also provide them with all the information they need about the order process. After the terms are signed, we can move on to step 2, and this is where I have the clients fill out a design questionnaire. This helps me get a full scope of what the client is envisioning and what they'd like to achieve. The topics of the questions are around their channel information, their channel niche, the overall aesthetic they're going for, the visual direction they have in mind, as well as any specific elements they'd like included in the design. Once I go over the questionnaire and approve it, I would then set up their client portal with their project due date. Even though this design is for me, I'm still going to take on the role of a client and fill out a design questionnaire so you guys can really grasp my vision and follow along with what I have in mind for my YouTube intro. Now this questionnaire might look like a lot, but it's really important that I grasp what my client is envisioning, which in turn will help me generate ideas before I begin the design process. Having a design questionnaire also ensures creative alignment between both me and my client, which will also prevent any misunderstandings and any unnecessary revisions down the line. So let's begin. So this is what my design questionnaires typically look like. Of course, the questions vary depending on the order type, but this is the information I collect for custom YouTube intros. We have my name, my email, my order number, don't have one, order type, channel name, and channel niche. Then we scroll down to the specifics about the intro. The idea that I'm envisioning for my YouTube intro is to conceptualize a photo editing program, almost as if I'm designing my intro as an intro. I would like all parts of my intro to come in as layers with the selection outlines. I would like my picture to come in first, followed by my channel name typed in a text box. On the last screen, I would like my channel name, social media handles, and a subscribe button. This is probably the most important part of the questionnaire because this is the information that helps me generate visuals and ideas before I start developing the design. Now we move on to the overall vibe and aesthetic I'm going for. Let's check off clean, simple, minimal, and mature. To conclude this part of the questionnaire, I also collect any visual inspo that will further help explain the direction of the design. I put my website in an Adobe Photoshop ad. Here's a visual reference for both. Moving along, we have a section for the color scheme and the font choice. I'm just going to use my brand colors and my brand fonts. I also include an option for a layered font in case the client would like a cursive font on top. Then we move to social media handles, music, and the footage for the image-based intro, which I'm just going to skip over for now. Then we get to the very bottom where I have a disclaimer where I basically encourage the client to go back and check their submissions for accuracy. I also include how long it will take for review, and then I collect a signature. It might seem extensive, but it's very, very important. And that's it for stage 2. We're on to stage 3, which is design development. I'm going to be using 2 programs, Photoshop and Final Cut Pro. I have 2 methods for designing intros. If the intro isn't too complex, then I'll just design the whole thing in Final Cut Pro. But if the intro does require me to design graphics, and this could be anything from cutting out photos, whatever the case may be, then I'll design the intro scene by scene in Photoshop. In my case, since I do have photos and a lot of little elements, I'll be using Photoshop to design the elements for the intro, and then I'll drag it all into Final Cut Pro to animate it and finish it off. So let's start with the first screen. As I noted in my questionnaire, I would like all parts of my intro to come in as layers with the selection outlines. And if you don't know what selection outlines are, I'll put an example here on the screen. This is basically the outline that pops up in photo editing programs when you've selected an element or layer. I want to make this video as informative as possible. However, I already had most of my elements created for a video I have on the home screen of my website. So the reality is I really just copied and pasted all of the selection outlines over here. I will show you an example of what I did to create them. That being, I just used a rectangle tool and created a stroke around the entire element I was highlighting, and then I created all of these small squares as you can see here. I first started with the background of my intro, and then I added selection outlines to my channel name, which is actually just my logo file. After doing that, I went ahead and did the same exact thing to the photos that I'll be using for my intro. As I mentioned, I did an edit for my website and it wasn't necessary for me to do it again. If you're curious to see how I took these pictures and how I created this edit, you can check in my last video. I have a full in-depth behind the scenes. So same process, same thing, did it to my hands and myself sitting in the middle. The very last thing that I need is my Photoshop tools. I actually screenshotted the toolbar in Photoshop to add so that I can click the tools in my intro and make it look like I'm designing it on screen. So I just went ahead and added that in and put it where I'd like it to be on screen in my intro. Now that all the elements are created, we can go ahead and export all of our files and then import them into Final Cut Pro. So the very first thing that I'm gonna do is create a new library for all of my YouTube branding, and then I'm gonna create a new project file for my intro. The first thing that I'm going to drag in is my background file, and I'm going to use this file to create, I think it's called an alpha channel, but to summarize, I basically want the beginning of my intro to be an overlay of the background dragging over whatever was on screen before. So I'm going to use keyframes to basically animate a cursor dragging the background from the bottom right corner to the top left corner. The button to add keyframes can be found right here or in the transformation tab on the right. If you don't know what keyframes are markers that define the beginning and end of an action in an animation, effect, or motion graphic. So you're going to see me add one keyframe at the beginning of the project, which is going to be the cursor and background out of frame. Then I'm going to add another keyframe, a second in, which is where the cursor and the background will be in frame. After designing each step, I'm going to show you how it looks. So this is how the opening of the intro will look. Now I want the Photoshop toolbar to drag in from the right so that I can start selecting the tools on it to use within my intro. And I'm going to use keyframes again to animate that. So once again, you're going to see me in the transformation tab where I'm adding a keyframe where the toolbar will be out of frame and another when it slides into frame. There are other ways to do this, like a slide in transition, but I just decided to use keyframes instead, and this is how it looks. Now I want the background of my picture to come in a circle reveal, so I'm going to add that transition on there. I'm just using the built-in circle transition to achieve this, and this is how it looks. Now that I've done that, I'm going to animate the cursor, dragging me from out of the frame into the frame with selection outlines on my photo. I'm going to be using keyframes for this as well. First keyframe will be me out of frame, and the second keyframe will be both me and the cursor in frame on screen. I did want to note that every time I animate the cursor clicking something, I use the file with the transformation outlines on. When the cursor clicks off of what was selected, I use another file of the same element without transformation outlines to mimic selecting on and off. And this is how it looks. Then the next step would be to drag in all of the photos of my hands one by one. I originally did do it one by one, but I realized very quickly that I was already at 7 seconds and I don't want my intro to be more than 14 seconds long. So I ended up having the cursor drag me in first and then all of my hands all together. Just so you can see how it would look with each hand one by one. It was cute, but it was a little bit dragged out to me, in my opinion. So, like I said, I ended up just combining all those hand layers together and having the cursor drag them in all at once to save a lot of time in my intro. I did use keyframes again to do this, and in this preview coming up you can see what I meant when I said that every time the cursor clicks off of a layer, the selection outlines move to the layer that the cursor clicks onto. I also went ahead and started the next screen by having my picture dragged out of frame using keyframes again. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but every time a specific tool is being used in the toolbar, I actually have a separate file with the tool selected in the toolbar, if that makes sense. So when the background was being brought in, I had the rectangular selection tool selected. Now that we're moving on to text, I have another file with the text tool selection selected. Hopefully this makes sense. Every time something is clicked, I also have the cursor scaled down 1 point to basically mimic an actual cursor click. Now the next thing I'm going to do is add in a text box reveal. This is where my channel name is going to be typed in. To do the reveal, I basically added 2 scale keyframes. The animation starts closed and then opens and reveals the box. So now we're moving on to my channel name. After I have the cursor click the text tool in the toolbar, I'm gonna have my channel name being typed in. Now I could use the actual texting animation effect within Final Cut Pro, but because my logo is made up of 2 different fonts, I won't be able to use that, but I am going to use the text animation as reference and just crop each letter of my logo to basically mimic it being typed in. I like to use the text animation in Final Cut Pro as reference because there's a set amount of seconds per each letter and I could animate it myself, but I like to use that for accuracy. I'm also going to drag in a typing cursor line so that it looks like I'm actually typing it on screen, because you know, if you were actually typing there would be a cursor line there. I want everything to be as realistic as possible, so I'm also going to use that, and I'm also going to animate that with each letter that's going to be typed in. Now you would have seen me add this cursor line file into the project. Since I am trying to achieve an actual type in of my channel name, I placed it at the front of my channel name, and now I'm going to use Final Cut Pro's typewriter animation so that I can mimic it. This was extremely tedious because I had to time and key the letters as well as the cursor line. To do this, again, I used keyframes in the crop tab, and for the cursor line, I used keyframes in the transform tab. I watched the typewriter animation, and whenever a new letter appeared, I cropped and keyed my logo file. After doing that, I went back in and moved the cursor line each time a new letter appeared. I also added a blinking effect to the cursor line by just turning the clip on and off. Out of everything, this probably took the most time, a lot of time and a lot of patience, but I like to be as thorough as I can. And like I said, there are probably faster ways to do everything that I'm doing, but I like to be as thorough and as precise as I can, so this is the way that I chose to do things. So now that this sample is created, we're in stage 4, which is revisions and final touches. This is where I would send the design off to the client for feedback. Each order comes with a set amount of revisions dependent on the order type so that my clients are able to make any necessary changes. Since I am the client and there are no set of revisions, I'm going to nitpick at the design and see if there's anything I'd like to add, change, or adjust.
3 hours later.
Okay, so I added a little bit more Photoshop elements, some more color, and I think we're good to go. I also created a text-based version of my intro just in case I get tired of my pictures. Knowing me, I probably will. I was fighting with myself a bit because I felt like the design was a little lackluster compared to what I create for other people, but I quickly came to realize I'm not an overly edited, over-the-top kind of girl. I like clean, mature aesthetics more than anything, so let this be a lesson to get out of your own head. Let's play the final result. And we're finished, and that brings us to the final stage. Once the design is signed off, I package up all the final files and I upload them to the client's portal for them to download. I am the client, so that really just means save to my hard drive. I'll probably design myself an outro later, but overall I really like how the design came out. If you've watched this far, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you for being here. Feel free to let me know what else you guys would like to see from me in the future. And as always, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!